Morning everyone. Not so much Football 360 today, but Boxeo 360. I haven't done a boxing one for a long time, but really felt I needed to do one because Josh Taylor's performance on Saturday night was just incredible. An incredible performance. I was really young when Lloyd Honeyghan beat Don Curry, but I remember what a superstar that made him overnight. Don Curry was pound for pound best boxer in the world at the time, and he went over to the States and did a number on him, and he became a superstar, like I say, overnight. But Honeyghan was, he was the underdog going into that fight. Josh Taylor was taking 2 world titles into this fight, a unification bout for all the marbles, and he was going up against a guy who, it was probably a 50-50 fight. I said I thought he'd win it in a really tight fight, and it proved to be that way. But I never expected to be as impressed by his performance, not for the first time either. His last 6 opponents have had a record of 136 wins and 1 defeat, and that 1 defeat was Victor Postol getting beat by Terence Crawford, who for the last 2 or 3 years has been the top 2 or 3 pound for pound in the world. So that demonstrates just what an incredible career Josh Taylor has already had after 18 fights. It was a close fight. I had it 6-6 in terms of the rounds, but the 2 knockdowns were the difference. Ramirez started really quickly. I expected Ramirez to be, the pressure fighter that he is, to never stop, to becoming like a train towards the end of the fight, and to really test Josh Taylor's resolve, physically, mentally. Maybe not technically, but technically I thought Ramirez was better than I expected him to be. Josh Taylor said after the fight that he was surprised that his combinations were 3 and 4 punches, because he was able to put his shots together really well. It wasn't just a case of being quite straightforward and coming forward in straight lines with kind of straight 1-2. He actually, although his feet are quite flat, his foot movement's definitely not as good as Josh Taylor's. He was able to kind of get enough movement in his body to get the leverage and the angles to throw the 3rd and 4th shots. His left he was able to sort of convert that from a kind of jab into a left lead hook. Yeah, he was really impressive. I had him 3-2 up. I think Mike Costello, who's for me is one of the best judges of a boxing match, he had him 4-1 up. So Taylor was in trouble to some degree. He certainly wasn't on top going back to his corner after the 5th round. I thought that was a critical moment in the fight. I think Taylor's ring IQ is really, really high, but I think Ben Davison brings something different, just adds a little bit extra to Josh Taylor. And Davison's words were along the lines of, get yourself back into offensive mode, because he'd started to defend a little bit too much. He'd been nailed down the middle a couple of times. He was kind of fighting with his guard really high and tight, which meant that he was a little bit too defensive. He wasn't looking for the opportunities to catch Ramirez and use his pressure against him. He was actually, he was allowing Ramirez to dictate rather than, actually getting on the front foot and throwing his own shots, which he's capable of doing. And I also think that he's tough enough to take one and to land 1 or 2, and that's clearly what Ben Davison thought as well. But that was a key moment, because he came out from that point onwards a little bit more ambitious in terms of his intent, and clearly, then 2 knockdowns in the 6th and 7th round. The first one was a great kind of short left hook that for me was a bit like Billy Joe Saunders, kind of the punch that did for Billy Joe Saunders against Canelo, in that Ramirez had kind of overcommitted. He left the side of his face open and got over his front foot. He was there to be nailed, but it was a really smart piece of work, exactly the type of stuff that you expect from Taylor, and that helped change the momentum of the fight, because from that point onwards, Ramirez knew that he was going to be made to pay if he did overcommit. But the 7th round was the biggie for me, because the punch that Taylor landed was an absolute peach. At the clinch, he saw his opportunity to kind of, actually, just as they broke, because Kenny Bayless didn't cover himself in glory. The referee put his hand on Ramirez, didn't say stop fighting, but was kind of had a half-hearted attempt to break them up. And Ramirez switched off for a split second, and Taylor just opened his body to get the leverage to throw the left uppercut, and it was a peach, landed right on the bottom. Ramirez on his back, his head hit the canvas, his eyes went up into his, went up and rolled up, and you looked at it and thought, my God, that's a heavy punch. But Bayless then gave Ramirez the opportunity to recover. Josh Taylor probably didn't help by not going to the neutral corner either, but I think he gave him maybe 20-25 seconds rather than, you have a 7 or 8 count and a few seconds to check if the fighter's okay, but he probably gave him 10 seconds more than he should have done, and that allowed Ramirez to get back to his corner, because if there'd have been a minute left in that, I think Taylor would have seen him away, because he was in trouble. He was on very unsteady legs, he'd been buzzed very badly, he didn't really know where he was, which makes it even more remarkable, the performance that Ramirez then went on to put on in the rest of the fight, because I had Taylor winning the 8th, but then I had 9, 10, 11 to Ramirez. He came on like an absolute train, just relentless, again, pressure fighting as you'd expect, maybe not quite as technical as he'd been in the start of the fight, but they were getting into the trenches. And Taylor he never looked in massive trouble, I have to say, but he certainly wasn't able to stop Ramirez's pressure, and didn't find the answers that perhaps he had done earlier in the fight or in those middle rounds. So went into the final round, I had Taylor 1 up going into the final round, and then that for me is when greatness happens, and that's when Taylor, like he did against Prograis, gets into that moment in the fight, and he just has the presence of mind and the control, and I think he's helped by Ben Davison. I really do think he adds a little bit. But he's got fantastic ring generalship, and he knew when to box, he created the opportunities, and he nailed Ramirez with 3 or 4 real quality punches, just single punches, but they were the kind of punches that everyone in the crowd, the judges, everyone watching at home realises one man is just slightly better than the other, because he'd land and then he'd just get out of the way. His head movement, his body movement, his footwork, his judging distance, and still controlling the ring in the 12th round after an absolute, it's life or death stuff against a true great. I mean, this guy Ramirez is, for me, a top 20 in the world pound for pound boxer. I don't think he'd get into the top 10 list, but he's one of the better world champs out there. Let's just put it that way. And he's bringing 2 belts into this fight. He's unbeaten, 28 years old, probably in his prime. This was a massive test, and that 12th round, he just stamped his greatness on the fight, like he did against Prograis. I would have said 2 years ago or 18 months ago that if you'd have put, you could have made an argument for any one of those 3 fighters to beat any one of the other 2, because Prograis and Ramirez up to that point had probably had slightly better records than Taylor. Well, they did, and he's seen them both off in really tight fights where you've realised that there is not a lot in this fight in terms of the quality, the strength. That there's a really good matchup at 140 pound. And Taylor has just found just the quality. He just stepped it up at the right moments, like you do in any sport. Like the great teams, 1-1 with 10 minutes to go in a league title decider or whatever. The great teams and the great players make great decisions, keep their presence of mind despite mental fatigue, physical fatigue. The noise, the conditions, the scenario, the pressure. And they just think clearly and they make the right decisions. And Josh Taylor is a brilliant example of that in a boxing context. He's a fantastic fighter, and it's not just about his ring generalship and his ability to box, because he's a great technical boxer. I mean, he can box in tight. You can stick him in a phone box and you can go and have it with anyone. I saw bits of work, but a little bit like Andre Ward. Who for me is the best defensive fighter, or the best fighter at close quarters that I've seen. And he was brilliant in the clinches. At the breaks, he would land really smart little sneaky punches to the body, to the head, but he would also protect himself, and he was fantastic there. He doesn't mind sitting in the pocket and trading with anyone. He's never been put on his backside in his pro career. He is teak tough, and he's taken some shots, and some big shots, and he always answers back. I've never seen anyone dominate him, never seen anyone put him on the back foot and pound him for 10, 20, 30 seconds. He might take 2 or 3 big shots, but he always finds a way to answer back, even if it's just to step in and hold, or land a short one and hold. He's just an unbelievable fighter, and he can also box at range. His feet are brilliant. He's got great range. He's quite a nice size. He's quite rangy. He has that kind of scope at 140 because he's tall and rangy. He's got good reach, and he can control distance with his footwork, with his jab. He can do it anyway, but he is a hard bastard. He is a tough kid who you know, there's nothing that frightens him. Well, you know, if he steps up to 147, he won't mind having it with anyone because he's got an unbelievable chin. He's so tough, and he'll fight all day long. He's got an engine, he's conditioning him, you know, to do what I said before about controlling that 12th round. Of course, mentally and having that greatness about you in terms of knowing how to win the tightest, the most elite rounds and the most elite fights is one part of it. But make no bones about it, you have to be the fittest guy on the block to be able to do that. And he can go 15 rounds. He can do it any way you want, Josh Taylor. That's how great he is. In terms of his next fight, I think Teofimo Lopez gives him a great fight because I think Teofimo Lopez is a superstar, just like Josh Taylor is, and I think he could also step up and fight Crawford, who is obviously one of the greats of the sport. I'd probably just pick Crawford in that fight, but no one knows when a fighter steps up, do they carry the same pop? Are they able to deal with the physicality and deal with the extra weight? Does it affect their speed? Does it affect their ability to maximise their strengths? And the same questions would be asked of Lopez if he stepped up to 140. So either of those fights are just absolute elite, you know, massive events. I don't care whether or not Sky Sports or BT or whatever aren't involved in them. If you love boxing, you watch a fighter like Josh Taylor, he's amazing. He's amazing, and Scotland should be rightly proud. I'm proud of him as a Brit. We back him 100%. I mean, when he fought Dave Ryan after 7 fights, I thought, wow, this kid's special, because Dave Ryan was a really tough British level fighter, and sometimes prospects get found out against guys like Dave Ryan, and he iced him. He absolutely iced him. I'm sure Dave Ryan would admit that. It was just a different level. I thought he'd get found out, or I thought he'd find it tough against Postol because of Postol's physicality. He'd beaten Lucas Matisse, who was a brilliant fighter, brilliant world champion, and I wasn't sure Josh Taylor could deal with Postol's size and physicality. Easy night's work that was for Taylor, and once you saw that, you knew he was going to be an absolute superstar. He's proved that against Prograis and now against Ramirez, and I just think the guy is the boss. I think he's the absolute boss. I love watching him fight. He's really fan friendly, so the Yanks love watching him. The other thing is he gives it the big one in terms of, you know, getting himself up for the fight week, you know, around the weigh-in and the conference and stuff. He's starting to get into the other guy's ear hole, and he says that he's trying to wind them up or whatever, and that's fine, whatever works for you. But I don't see anything but respect and sentiment, and you know, a guy who's got really good values afterwards either. He's respectful. He speaks really well. I think he, you know, there's a genuine side to him. Of course, if he ever gets beat, then we might see another side to him. Who knows? You see, it's easier to be respectful when you've given out a licking. Might not be so easy if that ever happens to him. But I just love the way he talks. I love the way I see genuine kind of sentiment when he goes back, and you know, the hugs and stuff. You see it a lot with fighters, and they hug afterwards, and you know, that respect is there. I don't think it's just for show. I just think he's a good guy. I think he's a good guy. I think he's a hard fucker. And man, can he fight? He can box. He's a sweet scientist, no doubt about it. But he can fight. He can stick it in the trenches. He'll give it to anyone. And yeah, I can't wait to see what happens next. Because for me, he's a great. He's a great Brit. He's already a great British boxing. I think he's close to being a great of world boxing. And he's definitely got his respect after Saturday night. He's earned his respect from everyone, the whole boxing world. If they didn't respect him after the Prograis fight, my God. He's up there now. For me, I think I've gotten about 6 on the pound for pound list at the moment, which after 18 fights ain't bad. He's 30 years old. He's probably got 2 or 3 years left. 2 or 3 years, you know, for his prime, to be able to cash in both money wise, which I hope he does, because he damn well deserves it. But I hope he goes and proves his greatness. I mean, it is greatness when you unify a division. He's only the 6th fighter to unify the division in the 4-belt era, so in the last 40 years roughly. So he's a special fighter, special person, and yeah, we should all get behind him. I really wanted to do this because, you know, if anyone's not so sure about boxing, or is a crossover fan and likes boxing but doesn't really know too much about about Josh Taylor. Look him up, watch his fights because he's incredible.